I have spent enough years watching people to know this much. We often push away the very thing we need most. Fear does that. Pride does that. And loneliness, the quiet kind that settles into a man who works alone, can make him suspicious of anything that looks like hope. I saw it happen once, in a timber town, on a summer afternoon, when a stagecoach rolled in carrying someone nobody expected. The coach door swung open. Lucas Hale's unlit cigarette slipped from his fingers and landed in the dirt. She was the last to step down, a woman in a dust-covered dress. Dark hair pinned beneath a worn hat. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and looked across the platform like she was searching for someone who might not want to be found. Lucas stood frozen by the hitching post. This was wrong. He had written for a plain woman, someone practical, someone who would not expect more than he could offer. The letter had been clear. The woman's gaze found his. She did not smile. Neither did he. Behind him, the station master spat tobacco into the dust and let out a low whistle. "Well now, Hale, that sure ain't what you described." Lucas said nothing. His hands hung useless at his sides. The woman picked up her own bag before he could move. "If you are listening from somewhere quiet tonight, I would be glad to know where you are. And if you have been enjoying these stories without subscribing, we would be grateful if you joined us." Lucas walked 3 paces ahead of her. He told himself it was the natural pace of a man who had places to be. The truth that heavier, he did not want to walk beside her, did not want to smell whatever perfume she had brought from whatever city had sent her, did not want to hear her breathing hard as she tried to keep up in boots that clicked too sharp against the packed dirt of Cedar Hollow's only street. She kept up anyway. Past the general store where Mrs. Addison stood in the doorway, arms folded, mouth already forming words she would spread to every woman in town by sundown. Past the blacksmith's, where the ring of hammer on iron paused just long enough for old Gus to look up, squint, and shake his head slow. Past the church with its whitewashed steeple and the graveyard behind it where Lucas's mother lay under a plain wooden cross. He did not look back, not once. The road narrowed where the forest began. Douglas firs pressed in close on both sides, their shadows cutting the afternoon heat. The air changed thicker, damper, carrying the smell of rotting needles and sap. A jay screamed somewhere overhead. Her boot heel caught on a root. Lucas heard the stumble, the quick scuff of leather on dirt. He stopped, turned. She was already upright. One hand brushed the front of her traveling dress. Her face showed nothing, not embarrassment, not pain, not the anger he half expected, just that same level gaze she had given him at the station. 60 acres, he said. The words rough in his throat. He gestured at the trees pressing in around them. Half of it old growth, Douglas fir, mostly, some cedar. She looked where he pointed, nodded once. He turned and kept walking. The cabin appeared through a break in the timber. 20 minutes later, a single-room structure with a pitched roof, a stone chimney trailing no smoke, a small lean-to attached to one side. The logs had weathered to gray. The door hung true in its frame. Lucas pushed it open and stepped aside. She moved past him, without hesitation. He caught a scent as she went. Not perfume. Something simpler. Road dust and sweat and the faint ghost of lavender soap, nearly worn away. She stood in the center of his cabin, turning slow, taking in the rope bed, the cook stove, the table with its single chair. Then she ran one finger along the windowsill. It came away clean. Something shifted in her expression so quick he almost missed it. She found the salt pork without asking. Lucas sat on the edge of the rope bed, unlacing his boots, and watched her move through his kitchen like she had been doing it for years. The barrel in the corner, the burlap sack of dried beans on the shelf above the stove, the cast-iron skillet hanging from its nail. She lifted the lid of the barrel, sniffed, nodded once, cut 3 thick slices with a knife she pulled from somewhere in her traveling dress. He had not even seen her carrying it. The pork hit the skillet with a hiss that filled the small cabin. Lucas pulled off his left boot, set it by the door, started on the right. She was out the door before he could ask where she was going. He heard her footsteps on the packed earth. Then nothing. A minute passed. 2. The pork crackled and spat in the pan. He was halfway to his feet when the door opened again. Wild onions, a handful of them, dirt still clinging to the pale roots. She must have spotted them near the woodpile when they came up the path. He had not noticed her looking. She rinsed them in the wash basin, chopped them rough, scraped them into the skillet with the flat of the knife. The smell changed richer now, something that made his stomach clench in a way it had not in months. He sat back down, pulled off the other boot. The beans took longer. She soaked them in water from the bucket by the door, then set them to simmer on the back of the stove while the pork finished. She moved the skillet off the heat, covered it with a tin plate to keep warm, found the coffee tin without searching, measured grounds into the pot by eye. Lucas watched all of it, said nothing. When she finally set the plate in front of him, he looked down at food that did not look like anything he had made himself in 2 years of eating alone. The pork was crisp at the edges, soft in the center. The onions had gone golden. The beans were simple, but seasoned with something pepper. Maybe from the small tin she had found behind the flour. He picked up his fork, ate. She sat across from him with her own plate, smaller portions, and ate without rushing. The lamp between them threw shadows across her face, up close. In the yellow light, he could see the exhaustion she had hidden at the station, faint purple beneath her eyes, a tightness at the corners of her mouth. He scraped his plate clean, set down his fork. She did not look up, but he saw her shoulders ease just slightly. "You cook like that every day," he said. "You'll use up my provisions in a week. Then I'll learn to stretch them." She set her own fork down, folded her hands on the table. Her knuckles were pale, where the skin pulled tight over bone. "We need to talk about terms." "Terms? 30 days. Her voice was level, steady, like she had practiced this speech on the long stagecoach ride. "I'll work same as any hand you'd hire. Sun up to sundown. You don't owe me wages. Just a roof and meals. End of 30 days. You tell me to go or stay." Lucas leaned back. The chair creaked under his weight. "Timber work ain't for—" He stopped. "For women." She did not blink. "Or for women who look like me." The lamp flame flickered. A log settled in the stove with a soft thump. "Both, I reckon." Something moved across her paw. Not anger. Not quite. Something harder. "Then I'll prove you wrong on both counts. Either way, I won't beg. Not from you. Not from anyone. You don't know what you're asking." He heard his own voice, rough and flat. "Crosscut saws weigh 30 pounds. Logs don't care if your hands blister. The river, I know what having nowhere to go does." She cut him off clean. No raise in her voice. No heat. Just fact. "Timber can't be worse." The words hung in the air between them. Lucas thought about the letter he had written, the woman he had imagined when he sealed the envelope, thick-waisted, plain-faced, grateful for any roof over her head. someone who would not expect much, someone who would not make him feel the silence of this cabin the way he felt it now, with her sitting across from him, her hands folded white-knuckled on his table. She was not that woman. She was not close, but she was here, and she was offering to work. 30 days, he said finally. She extended her hand across the table. He looked at it. The palm was soft, unmarked. The fingers were long, the nails clean. In 30 days, if she lasted, that hand would be something else entirely, calloused, cracked, scarred by rope and bark and the bite of cold river water. He shook it anyway. Her grip was firmer than he expected. The lean-to had been storage tools, spare rope, a broken chair he had been meaning to fix for 2 winters. Lucas cleared it out while she washed the dishes. He dragged in the old cot from under the cabin's eaves, shook the dust from a wool blanket worn thin at the edges, hung a piece of canvas across the doorway for privacy. It was not much. She did not complain. He lay awake long after the lamp went out, staring up at ceiling beams he had cut and notched himself 3 years ago. Through the thin wall, he heard the cot creak as she shifted, then silence. Then the creak again. She was not sleeping either. The cabin felt different with another heartbeat inside it. Smaller somehow, more full, the darkness pressed in close. And he could smell the ghost of wild onions and salt pork still hanging in the air, mixing with the kerosene from the lamp and something else, that faint trace of lavender soap he had caught when she walked past him at the door. 30 days. He had agreed because he had no argument against her, because she was right. Timber work could not be worse than whatever had put that look in her eyes when she said nowhere to go, because part of him, the part he did not like to examine too closely, wanted to see if she would really try. The cot creaked one more time, then went still, outside. A coyote called from somewhere up on the ridge. Another answered, farther off. The sounds faded into the rustle of wind through the Douglas firs, and Lucas closed his eyes. In the morning, she would find out what 30 days actually meant. He wondered if she would make it through the first one. The coffee was already on the stove when Lucas woke. He lay still for a moment, blinking at the ceiling beams, trying to place the smell, rich and dark and bitter, not the watery brew he usually made himself. Through the canvas curtain that served as her door, he heard nothing. The lean-to was empty. He found her outside, splitting kindling. The axe was too heavy for her. He could see it in the way she lifted it, the slight wobble at the top of the swing before she brought it down. But she brought it down true. The wood split clean. She set another piece on the block and raised the axe again. Lucas watched from the doorway, said nothing. She had pinned her wool skirt up with horse blanket pins, the hem tucked high enough to show the tops of her boots. Her hair was pulled back tight, already coming loose in dark strands around her face. Sweat darkened the collar of her dress, even though the morning air still held the night's chill. She saw him and straightened. The axe head rested on the block. "Coffee's ready," she said. "I noticed." He crossed to the woodpile, picked up a piece of cedar, turned it in his hands. Tight grain, good for shingles. He set it aside and reached for another. "Today," he said without looking at her, "you learn the saw." The crosscut saw weighed 32 pounds. Lucas had carried it alone for 3 years, dragged it into the timber every morning, hauled it back every night. The ash handles were worn smooth where his palms had gripped them 10,000 times. He laid it across a fallen Douglas fir, its trunk thick as a man's reach. Margaret stood on the other side, studying the teeth. "You pull," he said. Never push. Push binds the blade. Wears you out twice as fast. Just pull. Smooth and steady. Then let me bring it back. We find a rhythm. That's all it is. Rhythm. She gripped the handle. Her knuckles went white. Ready. She nodded. He pulled. The blade sang through the bark, bit into wood, through a spray of pale sawdust. He let the weight of the saw carry it back toward her. She pulled too hard. The blade jumped, skittered, caught on a knot. Lucas felt the jolt through his arms. Easy. He held the saw steady. You're fighting it. Let the blade do the work. She reset her grip, pulled again. Better. The sawdust flew in a thin stream, fragrant and fresh, landing on her boots and the forest floor. The blade doesn't seem interested in cooperating, she said through gritted teeth. Lucas watched her form, the set of her shoulders, the way she leaned into each pull instead of letting her arms do the work alone. Give it time, he said. Most things worth doing take time. They worked in silence. Pull, release, pull, release. The sound of the saw filled the space between the trees, a low, rhythmic rasp that sent squirrels chattering to higher branches. By noon, she had found something close to the right cadence. Her pulls came smoother, steadier. Lucas let himself fall into the old familiar trance of the work, muscles moving without thought, the world narrowing to the bite of steel and the smell of cut wood. Then he saw the blood. It seeped through the fabric wrapped around her right palm, a strip of white cloth, maybe torn from a petticoat. The stain spread slow, dark against the pale cotton. She did not stop. Pull, release, pull, release. Lucas said nothing, kept sawing. When the log finally split, crashing down into the undergrowth with a thud that shook the ground. Margaret let go of the handle and stood breathing hard. Her face was flushed. Sweat ran from her temples. She did not look at her hands. He walked to the next tree and started marking it with red ochre. Behind him, he heard her pick up the saw. Day 7 brought the river. The spring melt had swelled Cedar Creek to twice its summer width, brown water churning over rocks that normally stood dry. Lucas had been waiting for this, the current strong enough to move timber, not so strong it would sweep the logs past the collection point downstream. They worked with pike poles, standing knee-deep in water, so cold it made his bones ache. Margaret had rolled her skirts as high as they would go, tucked them into her belt. Her legs were bare from the knee down, pale against the dark water, goose flesh rising on skin that had probably never seen this kind of cold. She did not complain. The first log hummed down fast, spinning in the current. Lucas snagged it with his pole, guided it toward the bank. Margaret moved to help, planting her feet against a submerged rock. The rock shifted. She went down hard, the splash swallowing her whole. Lucas dropped his pole and lunged forward, water surging to his waist, arms reaching for where she had disappeared. She surfaced 3 feet away, sputtering, hair plastered across her face. Her hand shot out and grabbed the pike pole floating past her. She planted it in the riverbed and hauled herself upright, coughing water, skirt dragging heavy around her legs. I got it. She shoved wet hair from her eyes. I got it. Lucas stood frozen, water swirling around his thighs. She looked like something the river had tried to drown and failed soaked through. Shivering, mud streaked across her cheek, and then she laughed. Not polite laughter, not embarrassed laughter, something raw and sudden and real, bursting out of her like she could not hold it back. The sound startled a jay, from the branches overhead. Lucas stared at her. She waded toward the bank, wringing water from her hem with hands that shook from cold. The laughter faded, but something stayed in her face, a looseness that had not been there before. "That log's getting away," she said, nodding at the timber spinning downstream. Lucas turned, grabbed his pike pole, ran. That evening, the cabin smelled like wood smoke and wet wool. Margaret's dress hung on a rope near the stove, steaming gently. She sat at the table wrapped in the spare blanket, her ruined palms face up in the lamplight. The blisters had torn open sometime during the river work. Raw pink flesh showed through broken skin. She worked pine salve into them slowly, methodically, her jaw set tight. Lucas sat in the chair by the door, pretending to sharpen his axe. The whetstone rasped against steel. He watched her hands from the corner of his eye. After a while, he set the axe aside, crossed to the shelf above his bed. His fingers found the small clay jar in the back corner. Bear grease and beeswax, something his father had taught him to make when he was 12 years old. He set it on the table beside her elbow, said nothing, went back to his chair. She looked at the jar, looked at him, back at the jar. Then she unscrewed the lid and dipped 2 fingers in. The stove crackled. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. They ate in a silence that felt different than before, not empty, not awkward, just quiet. "The blade's getting easier," Margaret said without looking up from her plate. "Give it time." Lucas scraped beans onto his fork. "Most things worth doing take time." "Is that what your father told you?" He went still. She set her fork down. "The jar. That solve. It's not something a man figures out on his own. Someone taught you." The fire popped. A log shifted in the stove. "He died when I was 19, Lucas said. The words came out flat, harder than he intended. "Fever took him. Took my mother the same winter." Margaret said nothing. Lucas pushed his plate away, stood. "I'll check the timber stack before dark." He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. "The mortar in your chimney. The way it's angled. My father built chimneys too. He taught me to spot good work." Lucas's hand rested on the door frame. "He's gone as well," she said quietly. 3 years now. That's why I answered your letter. That's why I'm here." He did not turn around, did not trust what his face might show. The evening air hit his skin cool and sharp when he stepped outside. He walked to the timber stack, checked ropes that did not need checking, counted logs he already knew the number of. When he came back in, she was washing the dishes. He picked up a cloth and started drying without thinking about it. Neither of them mentioned what had been said, but something had shifted. He could feel it in the way she moved beside him at the wash basin, in the way his hands knew where to reach for each dish she passed, in the way the silence between them had grown a new kind of weight. He set the last plate on the shelf. She wrung out the rag. Their eyes met for half a second, then she turned away. And he saw her hands, her torn, blistered, salve-slicked hands trembling in the lamplight. Not from cold this time. Rain came on the 12th day. It started before dawn, a soft drumming on the roof that built into a steady roar by the time Lucas opened his eyes. He lay listening to it, feeling the damp that seeped through every crack in the cabin walls. No work today. The timber would be too slick, the trails too muddy, even the river would be running too fast for safe work. He found Margaret already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee in her hands. She had braided her hair back, the dark rope of it hanging between her shoulder blades. Her dress was the same one she had arrived in. She had no other, washed and mended so many times the fabric had grown soft. "Rain'll last through tomorrow, most likely," Lucas said. She nodded without turning. He poured himself coffee, sat at the table, and watched the gray light through the window. The sound of water surrounded them, dripping from the eaves, running in streams down the glass, pooling somewhere near the woodpile where the ground dipped low. Margaret moved away from the window. Her eyes traveled the cabin walls, pausing on things Lucas had stopped seeing years ago. The rusted horseshoe nailed above the door, the calendar from 1881, 3 years out of date, the shelf above his bed where he kept the things that mattered. Her gaze stopped on the ledger books, 2 of them, leather-bound, the covers water-stained and curling at the edges. He had bought them in Sacramento when he first filed the claim, full of ideas about keeping proper records, running a proper operation. The entries had grown sparse over the years, numbers he did not like to look at. "May I?" She was already reaching. Lucas shrugged. "Nothing interesting in there?" She pulled down the first ledger and carried it to the table, sat across from him, opened it to the first page, where his cramped handwriting listed the date of the claim, the acreage, the terms of the land office agreement. He watched her read. Her finger traced the columns: board feet cut, board feet sold, prices received. She turned pages slowly, her brow drawing down with each one. The rain hammered on. Lucas drank his coffee. It had gone cold, but he did not get up to warm it. "These prices," she said finally. "Who sets them?" "Harlan Cobb. He runs the mill in town. Only buyer within 50 miles. "And you've never questioned them?" Lucas set down his cup. "Man pays what he pays. Take it or haul your timber somewhere else. Nearest other buyers in Reading. 3 days by wagon, if the roads are good." Margaret said nothing. She turned another page, another. Her fingers stopped on an entry from the previous autumn: 200 board feet of Douglas fir. Sold for $80, 40 cents per board foot. She murmured, "That's the going rate." She looked up at him. Her eyes held something he could not read, not anger, not pity, something sharper. "Is it?" 3 days later, they went to town for supplies. The rain had stopped, leaving the roads thick with mud that sucked at the wagon wheels. Lucas drove while Margaret sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. She had said little since the morning with the ledgers. He told himself it did not matter. Cedar Hollow looked the same as always. The single muddy street, the false-fronted buildings, the handful of horses tied at the rail outside the saloon. Lucas pulled the wagon up to the general store and climbed down. Margaret was already walking toward Cobb's mill. He found her standing at the edge of the yard, watching the operation. Men hauled logs onto the platform scale, the big one, with brass weights that Cobb himself adjusted. The mill owner stood beside it with a pencil behind his ear and a ledger in his hands, calling out numbers to a clerk who scratched them down. Lucas came up beside her. "What are you looking at?" "The scale." Her voice was quiet, pitched low enough that only he could hear. "Watch the weights when he measures." Lucas watched. Cobb set a log on the platform, slid the brass weights along the beam, called out a number. The clerk wrote it down. The log moved on to the saw. "Looks right to me," Lucas said. "Look at his hand, the left one." Lucas looked. Cobb's left hand rested on the beam, fingers casual, almost lazy. Nothing unusual, except every time he called a number, his fingers pressed down just slightly, just enough to tip the balance a hair's breadth in his favor. Could be accident, Lucas said slowly. Watch again. He watched. Another log, another measurement, another subtle press of those fingers. Every single time, Margaret said. Every single log. They bought flour, salt, coffee. Lucas paid while Margaret wandered the aisles, stopping at the bolt cloth, running her fingers across calico she could not afford. The storekeeper watched her with narrow eyes. Mrs. Addison had done her work well. The whole town knew about Hale's mail-order woman now, knew she was too pretty to trust. Margaret ignored the looks. She moved to the stack of newspapers by the door, old copies. A week or two behind, brought in from Sacramento for those who cared to read. She picked up the Sacramento Bee, scanned the pages slowly, turned to another section. Her finger traced a column of small print. Lucas watched her from the counter. She was not browsing. She was searching. She set the paper down and bought thread and buttons with coins from a small purse he had not known she carried. They drove home in silence. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, the sky going purple and gold above the Douglas firs. Lucas unhitched the horse while Margaret carried the supplies inside. By the time he finished in the small stable, she had supper started on the stove. He found her on the porch afterward, sitting in the rocking chair with the short leg. It tipped forward and back with a gentle thunk each time she moved. Crickets sang in the underbrush. The air smelled of pine and cooling earth. Lucas leaned against the porch rail. "Going to tell me what you saw in those ledgers?" She rocked. Thunk, thunk. "My father ran a mercantile in Harrisburg," she said finally. "Dry goods, hardware, some farm equipment. Not big, but steady. He taught me the books when I was 14, said a woman who understood numbers would never be fooled by a man who didn't." Lucas waited. When he died, the creditors came. I watched them pick apart everything he'd built, the inventory, the fixtures, the building itself. They had papers, contracts, ledgers of their own. Half of it was lies dressed up in legal language. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. I could see the numbers didn't add up. She stopped rocking, looked at him. "I know what honest numbers look like, Lucas, and I know what lies look like." The crickets sang on. A nightjar called from somewhere in the timber. "Cobb's been buying my wood since I started this claim," Lucas said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, flat, careful. 3 years, never had a complaint. And he's been robbing you just as long. Man's got a reputation in this town. People trust him." Margaret's hands tightened on the arms of the chair. "Reputation ain't the same as character. I should know I came here with neither." Lucas turned to look out at the darkening trees. His jaw ached. He realized he had been clenching it. "That newspaper I looked at in the store," Margaret continued. "Sacramento Bee. They print market prices for timber every week. I wanted to check something." She paused. "Douglas fir, first grade, is running 92 cents per board foot. Has been all season." 92 cents. Lucas did the math in his head. 3 years of timber, hundreds of logs, thousands of board feet, at 40 cents instead of 92. His hands flattened on the porch rail. "That can't be right." "It is. I can show you the paper if you want." "I remember the page." The nightjar called again. The crickets seemed louder now, filling the silence Lucas could not. He thought about the payments he had missed on the claim. The winters he had stretched salt pork and beans because there was no money for anything else. The boots he had resold 3 times because he could not afford new ones all those years. Cobb smiling, slapping his back. telling him the market was soft. The rates were fair. Everyone was struggling. Why? The word came out rough. Why tell me this? Margaret stood. The rocking chair tipped forward, then settled with a final thunk. Because you shook my hand, she said quietly. Because you let me prove what I could do, instead of sending me back on the next stage. Because you haven't asked me a single question about where I came from or what I'm running from. And that's worth something. She moved toward the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. Cobb's holding a meeting at the town hall next week. I heard him telling his clerk at the mill he's trying to sign new contracts with every timberman in the valley. Lucas turned to face her. If we had proof, she said, real proof, the ledgers, the newspaper prices, testimony from someone who saw him work that scale, we could stop him. The lamplight from inside caught her face, half-shadowed, half-bright. Unless you'd rather keep paying 40 centites for wood, worth 92. She went inside. The canvas curtain to her room rustled shut. Lucas stood alone on the porch, listening to the crickets, watching the last light drain from the sky. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs to make them stop. 3 years. 3 years of being robbed in plain daylight by a man who smiled while he did it. And Margaret had seen it in an afternoon. He thought about Cobb's hand on the scale, about the numbers in his ledgers that had never quite added up, about the contract the man would soon bring to this very cabin, full of term designed to lock Lucas in forever. Tomorrow was day 16. 14 days left in their agreement. 14 days to decide if he trusted her enough to fight. Day 20. The saw moved between them without effort. Lucas pulled. Margaret pulled. The blade bit into Douglas fir, throwing sawdust in a steady stream. No words needed, no corrections. Just the rhythm they had built over weeks of work, the push and pull, the shared breath, the way their bodies knew when to move without their minds telling them. The morning light came slanted through the canopy, catching the sweat on Margaret's face, the loose strands of hair escaping her braid. Her hands gripped the ash handle with confidence now. The blisters had healed into calluses, thick pads of roughened skin that matched his own. Lucas watched her when she was not looking. He had been doing that more lately, noticing things. The way she hummed sometimes, low under her breath. Songs he did not recognize. The way she moved through the timber with her head up instead of watching her feet. The way the cabin felt empty on the rare mornings she slept past dawn. She caught him watching. Their eyes met across the length of the saw. Neither stopped pulling, neither spoke. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, maybe, or question, and then she looked away, and the moment dissolved into the rasp of steel through wood. The tree came down an hour later, crashing through the underbrush with a sound like thunder. They stood side by side, breathing hard, watching the dust settle. "Good timber," Margaret said. "Best on the claim." She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. Her sleeve was rolled to the elbow, the fabric dark with sweat. Lucas could see the muscles in her forearm now, new muscles, built by weeks of hauling and cutting and lifting. "Coffee?" she asked. He nodded. They walked back to the cabin together, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Sunday came quiet. No work on the Lord's Day. That was the rule Lucas's father had kept, and Lucas kept it too. Even out here where there was no church to attend and no neighbors to notice. The tools stayed in the shed. The timber stayed where it lay. Margaret sat in the rocking chair by the window, a slim book open in her lap. The cover was worn soft. The spine cracked in a dozen places. She had brought it in her portmanteau, the only thing. He realized now. That was not purely practical, the only luxury. "Listen to this," she said. Lucas looked up from the harness he was mending. The leather strap lay across his knee, the brass buckle loose in his fingers. He had been working on the same buckle for the past 10 minutes, turning it over and over without actually fixing anything. Margaret began to read. Her voice was different when she read poetry, slower, softer, shaped around the words like she was tasting them. The poem was something about the sea, about ships and stars and the long journey home. Lucas did not follow all of it. The meaning slipped past him like water through fingers. But her voice filled the cabin the way wood smoke filled it, seeping into every corner, settling into the silence between the walls. He turned the buckle again. His hands had stopped moving. "Longfellow," she said when she finished. "My mother used to read him to us at night, my sister and me, before the fire." Lucas waited for her to say more. She did not. The rocking chair creaked. The buckle sat heavy in his palm. Outside, a woodpecker hammered at something in the distance, the sound sharp and rhythmic. Margaret turned the page and began another poem. Lucas closed his eyes, just for a moment, just to listen. He did not hear the buggy coming up the path. The knock came hard. 3 quick raps against the cabin door. Lucas's eyes snapped open. Margaret had already closed the book, her body gone still in the chair. The rocking stopped. He crossed to the door and pulled it open. Harlan Cobb stood on the porch, in his Sunday-best black coat, clean shirt, boots polished to a shine. His buggy sat in the clearing behind him, the black body gleaming, the red wheels bright against the brown earth. A gray mare stood patient in the traces. "Hail," Cobb smiled, showing teeth. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "It's Sunday, Cobb. Won't take but a minute." The mill owner was already pushing past him, stepping into the cabin like he owned it. His eyes swept the room, the table, the stove, the woman in the rocking chair who had not moved. "Mrs. Hale," Cobb tipped his hat. "We're not married," Margaret said. Cobb's smile flickered. "Recovered. Of course. My mistake." He turned back to Lucas, pulling a folded paper from his coat pocket. "Brought you something. Been meaning to come by for weeks, but you know how it is. Business." He spread the paper on the table, cream-colored, expensive, the kind of paper lawyers used. Lucas could see dense blocks of printed text, blank lines waiting for signatures. "New contract," Cobb said. "Exclusive timber rights, 3-year term, guaranteed buyer, guaranteed prices, no more hustling, no more worrying about where to sell. Just cut your trees and bring them to me. Simple." Lucas looked at the paper. The words blurred together party of the first part. Whereas, hereby agrees. What prices? Cobb's smile widened. Fair prices, same as always. 45 cents per board foot, actually raised it a nickel. C. Shows good faith. From the corner of his eye, Lucas saw Margaret's hand tighten on the book she still held. Her knuckles went white against the worn leather cover. "And if I want to sell elsewhere," Cobb laughed. It was a warm sound, friendly, the laugh of a man who had never been refused anything in his life. "Why would you? We're neighbors, Hale, practically family. I've been buying your timber since you started. Nobody else is going to give you a better deal." Lucas stared at the contract. The blank line at the bottom seemed to pulse in the lamplight. "Think about it," Cobb said. He was already moving toward the door, his business concluded in his own mind. No rush. Well, some rush. I'll need an answer by the town meeting next week. Got to finalize all the contracts at once. Make it official. You understand. He tipped his hat toward Margaret again. She did not respond. The door closed behind him. The sound of the buggy wheels faded down the path, leaving silence in its wake. Lucas stood at the table, looking down at the contract. Margaret rose from the rocking chair, crossed the room, stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her arm near his. May I, but... He stepped aside. She pulled the contract toward her and began to read. Her finger moved down the page, pausing at certain passages. Moving on. She reached the end, turned the paper over, found more text on the back. Read that too. Then she went to the shelf and took down Lucas's ledger, opened it to a page filled with numbers, compared the two documents side by side. Lucas watched her work. Her face was unreadable, the same level expression she had worn that first day at the Stagecoach station. But her hands moved fast, certain. She knew what she was looking for. She had been looking at those Sacramento papers more than once. He realized. Every trip to town for the past week. She had checked the prices, kept notes in her head, prepared for this moment without telling him. She found a pencil stub on the windowsill and began making notes in the margins of Cobb's contract. Small marks, neat and precise. Lucas could not read them from where he stood. The light outside was fading. The cabin grew dim around them. Finally, she set down the pencil, looked up. He wants to own you, she said. This paper would let him... Lucas's throat tightened. Show me. She pointed to a clause near the bottom. This says he can adjust prices based on market conditions. His conditions, his definition of the market. You'd have no say. Her finger moved up the page. This one locks you into selling exclusively to him. For 3 years. Break the contract. You owe him damages 3 times the value of any timber you sold elsewhere. Another clause. Another trap. And this one gives him right of first refusal on the claim itself. You try to sell the land. He can match any offer. Or block the sale entirely if he claims you owe him money. Lucas's hands flattened on the table. It's not a contract, Margaret said quietly. It's a cage. The woodpecker had stopped hammering. The cabin was silent except for the tick of the cooling stove and the distant call of an owl beginning its evening hunt. Lucas looked at the woman standing beside him, at her scarred hands, her level eyes, her mouth set in a hard line. Why does he want this so bad? He asked. It's just timber. I'm one man with 60 acres. What's it to him? Margaret did not answer right away. She turned back to the contract, studying the signature line at the bottom. Cobb's name was already printed there. Neat and official. Because you're not the only one, she said finally. I've been watching at the mill, listening. He's doing this to every timberman in the valley. Dawson, Garrett, McBride, all small claims, all independent. If he locks them all in with contracts like this... She did not finish the sentence. She did not have to. Margaret came back from town with mud on her hem and something broken in her face. Lucas was splitting wood when he heard the horse. He set down the axe and walked to meet her, wiping his hands on his trousers. The mare looked tired, head hanging, flanks dark with sweat from being pushed too hard on the return. Margaret did not dismount right away. She sat in the saddle, staring at nothing, her hands loose on the reins. The flour sack was tied behind her, the salt in its muslin bag, but she had not moved to untie them. What happened? She flinched at his voice, looked at him like she had forgotten he was there. Then she climbed down, her movements stiff, and walked past him toward the cabin without a word. He found out 2 hours later. Old Pete Dawson came riding up the path on his sway-backed mule, hat in his hands, face screwed up like he had swallowed something sour. Pete had the claim north of Lucas's 40 acres of second-growth timber, barely enough to keep him in beans and coffee. They were not friends, exactly, but they were neighbors. "Thought you ought to know," Pete said, not getting down from the mule. "What they're saying in town." Lucas leaned against the porch rail. "Saying about what?" Pete's eyes cut to the cabin door, then back. "About her, your woman." The axe handle was still in Lucas's hand. He had carried it from the woodpile without thinking. Now his fingers tightened around it. "What about her?" Pete shifted in his saddle. The mule stamped, restless. "Cobb's been talking, down at the saloon, over at the general store, anywhere folks'll listen." He paused, working his jaw like the words tasted bad. "Says she's a confidence woman, a swindler. Says she targets men like you lonely, working a claim alone and worms her way in, gets them to trust her, then takes everything they got and moves on." Lucas's grip on the axe handle went white. "Says he's seen her type before." Pete continued, "Back in Sacramento. Says he's got half a mind to wire the sheriff there. See if there's paper on her." The blood was pounding in Lucas's ears now. He could hear it. A dull roar that drowned out the bird song and the wind in the trees. "And people believe him." Pete looked away. "Cobb's got a reputation. Been here longer than any of us. And she well." He shrugged. "Miserable. She showed up out of nowhere. Awful pretty for a mail-order bride. Folks talk." Lucas said nothing. Pete gathered his reins. "Just thought you ought to hear it from someone who don't mean you harm. Whatever the truth is, that's your business." He turned the mule and started back down the path. Stopped, looked over his shoulder. "Town meeting's in 3 days. Cobb's planning to make it official then. Sign everyone up. Might want to think about what you're gonna do." The mule's hooves faded into the forest. Lucas stood on the porch, the axe handle still in his fist, and felt the ground shift under his feet. He found her behind the cabin, splitting kindling. She was working too fast. The axe came down hard, wild, the blade biting into the block at an angle that sent wood chips flying. Her hair had come loose from its braid, sweat soaked through the back of her dress. She did not look up when he approached. "Margaret!" The axe came down. A piece of cedar split crooked toe, fell to the dirt. "Margaret!" She grabbed another piece, set it on the block, raised the axe. "Is it true?" The blade stopped mid-swing. Her shoulders went rigid. "Pete Dawson was just here, told me what Cobb's been a-saying." Lucas's voice sounded strange to him, flat, hard, not his own. "About you being a swindler, a confidence woman. Is it true?" She lowered the axe, slowly, set it against the block, turned to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her jaw was clenched so tight he could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. Mud streaked her dress, not just the hem now, but the bodice too, like she had fallen somewhere and not bothered to brush it off. "You're asking me that? I need to know. 25 days. Her voice cracked on the number. 25 days I've worked beside you, cut timber beside you, bled beside you." She held up her hands, the scars, the calluses, the broken nail on her left thumb that had not healed right. "These hands, look at them. Look at what your timber did to them. And you're asking me if it's true." Lucas's throat was dry. "I need to hear you say it." Something snapped in her face. The careful composure she had worn since the day she stepped off that stagecoach. It shattered, and what came out from underneath was raw and ugly and desperate. "No," the word came out like a blow. "No, it's not true. I'm not a swindler. I'm not a confidence woman. I'm a bookkeeper's daughter from Harrisburg who watched her family lose everything and had nowhere left to go. So I answered an advertisement from a man who wanted someone plain and practical and got me instead." She was shaking now, her whole body. "I came here with nothing. One dress, one book, $12 in a coin purse my mother gave me before she died. I didn't come to steal from you. I came because you were the only man who wrote back, the only one who didn't ask what I looked like, the only one who seemed like he might be decent." Her voice broke on the last word. "And now you're standing there. You're standing there asking me if Harlan Cobb is telling the truth about me." She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just broken glass. "Harlan Cobb, the man who has been robbing you blind for 3 years, that's who you believe." Lucas opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Margaret bent down and picked up the axe. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She set another piece of cedar on the block, raised the blade. "Get out of my sight." The axe came down. The wood split clean. She did not look at him again. Lucas walked into the forest. He did not know where he was going. His feet moved without direction, carrying him deeper into the timber, away from the cabin, away from her voice still ringing in his ears. The ground was soft from yesterday's rain, mud sucking at his boots with every step. He walked until he could not hear anything but his own breathing. Then he stopped, leaned against a Douglas fir, slid down until he was sitting in the dirt with his back against the bark and his head in his hands. 25 days. He replayed them all, the blisters she had hidden, the river that nearly drowned her, the ledgers she had studied by lamplight, finding the patterns he had missed, the meals she had cooked without complaint, the poetry she had read on Sundays, the way her hands had learned the rhythm of the saw, the way she had laughed when she fell in the water, the way she had said, "That's your answer," right there when he hesitated too long. He had hesitated. He had asked her, and the hesitation had been the answer. Just like she said. 3 years of Cobb lying to his face, and Lucas had never questioned it. 3 weeks of Margaret proving herself every single day, and he had doubted her in an instant. He pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. The mud soaked through his trousers, cold, seeped into his bones. He did not move. Darkness had fallen by the time he made it back to the cabin. The lamp was lit inside a thin yellow glow through the window. Smoke rose from the chimney. She had made supper, of course she had. Even now, even after what he had done. Lucas climbed the porch steps. His boots were caked with mud. His hands were numb from the cold. He stood at the door for a long moment, not knowing what to say, not sure there were words for this. He pushed it open. The table was set. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 fork. Margaret was not there. The canvas curtain to her room was closed. The lamp burned low on the table. Casting long shadows across the empty chair, Lucas stood in the doorway, dripping mud onto the floor he had swept that morning. Through the thin plank wall, he heard it, a sound so quiet he almost missed it. Quick, ragged breaths, the creak of the kid as she tried to muffle them. She was crying, not dramatic sobs, not the weeping of a woman who wanted to be heard, just the small, broken sounds of someone who had finally run out of strength. Lucas pressed his palm flat against the wood. His mouth opened. Her name formed on his lips. No sound came out. Day 28. Lucas woke to silence. No coffee on the stove, no creak of the rocking chair, no soft sounds of movement from behind the canvas curtain. He lay still, listening. The cabin held its breath around him. Then he heard it, the scrape of leather on wood, the click of a clasp. He was up before he knew he was moving. Across the room, in 3 strides, through the doorway, Margaret stood by the cabin door in her traveling dress, the same one she had worn that first day at the Stagecoach station. Her portmanteau sat at her feet. Straps buckled, ready to go. Her hair was pinned up tight, her face was pale and set. She did not look at him. "I said 30 days," she said. Her voice was flat, emptied of everything. "But there's no point waiting for a verdict. I already know." Lucas's bare feet stuck to the cold floorboards. He could not feel them. "Margaret, don't." She picked up the portmanteau. Her scarred hands gripped the handle, knuckles white. "Don't say my name like that. Not after yesterday. Not after—" She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "I came here to prove I could stay, that I was worth keeping." Her voice cracked on the last word. "But I can't prove anything to a man who doesn't want to believe me. I know that now." She moved toward the door. Lucas stepped in front of it. Not to block her, not with his body, not with force. He just stood there, filling the frame the way he had done that first day when she arrived. Uncertain then, uncertain now. "Move, Lucas." He did not move. "I'm not asking you to stay." She looked up at him. Her eyes were red, swollen from the crying he had heard through the wall. She had tried to hide it with cold water. He could see the damp at her temples. "Then what are you asking?" The words stuck in his throat. He did not know how to say them, did not know if they were the right words, or if there were right words at all. He only knew that if she walked out that door, something would end that he was not ready to lose. "Cobb's meeting is tonight." His voice came out rough, scraped raw. "Town hall, every timber man in the valley." "I know. He's going to sign them all, lock them into contracts. Same terms he tried to give me." Margaret's grip on the portmanteau tightened. "That's not my problem anymore." "No." Lucas let out a breath. "It's mine, and I can't stop him alone." She stared at him. "You were right," he said. "About the numbers, about the skillion, about all of it. You saw what I couldn't see, because I was too close, too stupid, too—" He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to talk in front of people. Don't know how to explain figures and contracts and the things you understand. But you do. You could show them, make them see." Margaret's jaw tightened. "You want me to stand up in front of a town that thinks I'm a swindler and tell them their most respected businessman has been robbing them blind?" "Yes. They'll laugh me out of the room. Maybe. They'll call me a liar, a con woman, everything Cobb's been saying about me. Maybe. And you'll be standing there beside me after what you asked me yesterday." The question hit him like a fist to the chest. He thought about his hand on the wall last night, his mouth forming her name, the silence that followed because he had been too much of a coward to knock. "Yes," he said. "I'll be standing there." Margaret's eyes searched his face, looking for something. He did not know if she found it. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why does this matter to you now?" Lucas did not answer right away. He could not give her pretty words, could not dress it up in the language she might have wanted to hear. All he had was the truth, plain and hard. "Because you shook my hand," he said. And I gave you my word. 30 days. I broke that yesterday. This is the only way I know to make it right." She set the portmanteau down. "After tonight," she said. "It's my choice. Go or stay." "After tonight. And you won't try to stop me either way." He wanted to argue, wanted to say things he had no right to say after what he had done, but he saw the steel in her eyes, and he knew better. "I won't try to stop you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked to the table, sat down, and began laying out papers. "We'll need the ledgers," she said, "all 3 years, and copies of the Sacramento Bee showing market prices. Do you still have those newspapers?" Lucas moved to the shelf above his bed. The town hall was full when they arrived. Kerosene lamps hung from the ceiling on chains, throwing yellow light across the room. Men in work clothes and Sunday coats sat shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, tobacco smoke hazing the air. The smell of sweat and pine pitch and the sour tang of spittoons filled Lucas's nose. Cobb stood at the front, behind a table stacked with contracts. His clerk sat beside him, pen ready. The mill owner's smile was wide, confident, the smile of a man who had already won. The room went quiet when Lucas walked in, quieter still when they saw who walked beside him. Margaret carried the ledgers in her arms, 3 leather-bound books, water-stained and worn. The newspapers were tucked beneath them, folded to the pages showing timber prices. "Hale," Cobb's smile did not waver. "Good to see you. Come to sign." Lucas did not answer. He walked to the front of the room, Margaret at his side, and stopped 3 feet from Cobb's table. The silence pressed in thick and heavy. "Gentlemen," Margaret's voice cut through it, clear and steady. She set the ledgers on the table beside Cobb's stack of contracts. "My name is Margaret. I've been working Lucas Hale's timber claim for 28 days. Before that, I kept books for my father's mercantile in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania." Someone in the back coughed. A bench creaked as a man shifted his weight. "I know what Mr. Cobb has been saying about me." She did not look at Cobb, did not look at anyone but the rows of weathered faces before her. "I know you've been told I'm a swindler, a confidence woman, a liar." "Now hold on," Cobb started. "I'm not here to defend myself." Margaret cut him off clean. "I'm here to show you numbers, facts, things that don't depend on whether you trust me or not." She opened the first ledger, turned it to face the crowd. "This is Mr. Hale's record of timber sales for the past 3 years, every log he's sold to Mr. Cobb, and every payment he's received." Her finger traced the columns. 40 cents per board foot. That's what Mr. Cobb has been paying, every season, every year." She pulled out the newspaper, unfolded it, held it up so the men in the front rows could see the print. "This is the Sacramento Bee from last week. Market price for Douglas fir. First grade, 92 cents per board foot." The murmur started in the back and spread forward like a wave. "That's more than double," someone said. "Can't be right," said another. "Cobb's been fair to us for years." A third voice called out, "Why should we believe some woman who just showed up?" Margaret did not flinch. She set the newspaper on the table. "I watched Mr. Cobb weigh Mr. Hale's timber at the mill. His left hand presses the scale beam every time he calls a number. Not much, just enough to shave a few board feet off every measurement." "That's a lie." Cobb's face had gone red. His smile was gone now, replaced by something uglier. "This woman shows up out of nowhere, spreads lies about a man who's served this community for 15 years. Check your own ledgers." The voice came from the back. Old Pete Dawson, still in his mud-caked boots, was standing up. "Check your own numbers against the Sacramento papers," Pete said. "I got 3 years of sales to Cobb, same as Hale. Been meaning to look at 'em closer. Never had cause before. Pete, you can't be serious." A man beside him started. "I'm serious as a heart attack." Pete's voice was hard. "I watched that woman haul timber out of Hale's River 3 weeks back. Soaked to the bone. Still working. That ain't no swindler. That's someone who earns her keep." Another man stood. "Garrett, from the claim south of town. I watched him weigh my timber last month. Thought the numbers looked low. Didn't say nothing because, well," he shrugged. "Cobb's got a reputation." "Reputation." Margaret's voice carried over the rising noise. "That's what Mr. Cobb has. That's what he's been trading on while he takes your timber at half its value and sells it in Sacramento for full price." She picked up one of Cobb's contracts from the table, held it up so everyone could see. "And these papers would lock you in for 3 years, fixed prices, exclusive sales, no way out." She pointed to a clause near the bottom. "This line right here gives him the right to adjust payments based on market conditions. His market. You sign this, and he owns you." The murmur had become a roar now. Men were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Cobb's clerk had stopped writing. Cobb himself stood frozen behind his table, mouth working, but no words coming out. "Why should we trust her?" A man in the front row called out. "She's just some mail-order woman. Been here less than a month." Lucas stepped forward. He had not planned to speak, had not known what he would say if he did. But the words came anyway, pulled from somewhere deep. "Because I do." The room went quiet again. "I doubted her," Lucas said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. 2 days ago, I stood in my own cabin and asked her if Cobb's lies were true. I did that. And she had every right to leave, every reason to walk away and let me sign that contract and get exactly what I deserved. He looked at Margaret. She was watching him with an expression he could not read. But she's here, standing in front of men who don't trust her, holding up proof she spent weeks gathering, because it's the right thing to do. He turned back to the crowd. "I've been selling timber in this valley for 3 years. Never once questioned what Cobb paid me, never once checked his numbers against the market. She did it in an afternoon." An old man near the back stood up slowly. Lucas recognized him, McBride, who had been working timber in these hills longer than anyone. "I want to see them numbers myself," McBride said. "Side by side, her papers and mine." "So do I," said Garrett. "And me dish," said Pete. Cobb's face had gone white. He grabbed the stack of contracts from the table, clutching them to his chest like a shield. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're going to take the word of a stranger over mine after everything I've done for this town." McBride walked slowly to the front of the room. He stopped in front of Margaret, looked her up and down, then turned to face Cobb. "Show us your books," he said quietly. "The real ones. The ones you keep in that back office. Nobody's allowed in." Cobb's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. In the silence, Lucas heard the back door of the town hall creak open. He turned just in time to see Cobb's clerk slip through it into the night. The walk home was different. Lucas felt it before he understood it, the shift in the air, the way people moved around them as they left the town hall. Men who had avoided his eyes for years now nodded as he passed, tipped their hats. Old McBride clapped him on the shoulder without a word. Pete Dawson fell into step beside them for a quarter mile, talking about nothing in particular, before turning off toward his own claim. Margaret walked beside him, the ledgers tucked under her arm. She had not said anything since they left the hall. The contracts lay scattered on Cobb's table, unsigned. The mill owner had slipped out the back door before the meeting ended. His clerk already gone ahead of him. Word was already spreading that Cobb's real books had been found in his office, 2 sets of numbers, one for show and one for truth. The moon was up by the time they reached the cabin, silver light filtering through the Douglas firs. Their footsteps crunched on the path, the only sound in the still night air. Lucas pushed open the door. The lamp had burned low in their absence, the wick guttering in its pool of oil. He trimmed it, added kerosene, and the room brightened. Margaret set the ledgers on the table, stood with her hands at her sides, not moving toward her room, not moving toward the door. "What happens now?" she asked. Lucas turned to face her. The lamplight caught the hollows under her eyes, the exhaustion she had been carrying since that morning, since yesterday. "Since the day she arrived, now we sleep," he said, "and tomorrow we work." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked to her room and pulled the canvas curtain shut. Day 30 came with rain. Lucas woke to the sound of it drumming on the roof. Steady and gray. He lay still, watching the light change in the window, thinking about nothing, thinking about everything. The 30 days were done. The agreement was complete. He heard the creak of the cot in her room, the rustle of fabric, then silence. He got up, pulled on his boots, started coffee on the stove. The canvas curtain moved. Margaret stood in the doorway. Dressed in her traveling clothes, her portmanteau sat at her feet. Straps buckled, her hair was pinned up the way it had been that first day. Her face was calm, composed, unreadable. Lucas's hands stopped moving on the coffee pot. "The agreement was 30 days, she said. "Those 30 days are done." He nodded. His throat felt tight. "You said it was my choice. Go or stay." "I did." She picked up the portmanteau, held it in front of her like a shield. "I've been thinking about it all night, about what happened at the meeting, about what you said." Lucas waited. The rain drummed on. "You stood up for me," she said slowly, "in front of the whole town, after what you asked me the day before, after everything." "It was the least I could do." "No," she shook her head. "It wasn't the least. It was more than I expected, more than I had any right to expect." The coffee pot began to hiss on the stove. Lucas did not move to take it off. "I came here because I had nowhere else to go," Margaret said. "I told you that. It was true, but it's not the whole truth." She took a breath. "I came here because I wanted to start over, to be someone other than the woman who lost everything and couldn't stop it, to prove I could build something instead of just watching things fall apart." She set the portmanteau on the floor. "I proved that. These past 30 days, the timber, the ledgers, the meeting, I proved I could do something that mattered, something real." Lucas's heart was pounding. He could feel it in his chest, in his throat, in his temples. "So the question isn't whether I can stay," she said. "The question is whether you want me to." The rain filled the silence between them. Lucas crossed the room. 3 steps. 4. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see the slight tremor in her hands, the pulse beating fast at her throat. He reached down and picked up her portmanteau. She went still. He carried it across the cabin, past the table with its single chair, past the shelf with the ledgers and the jar of bear grease salve, past the cook stove where the coffee was starting to boil over. He set it down beside the rope bed, his bed. not the lean-to, not the storage room. Then he turned to face her. "Stay," he said. 1 month later, the cabin looked different. Lucas noticed it in pieces. The way a man notices the weather changing, not all at once, but in small shifts that added up to something new. A second chair at the table, dragged in from the lean-to and mended where the leg had cracked. A curtain of yellow calico with small blue flowers, hung in the window to replace the faded scraps that had been there before. Wildflowers in a mason jar on the shelf, black-eyed Susans that Margaret had picked from the meadow above the creek. 2 tin cups on wooden hooks by the stove, 2 plates in the wash basin, 2 sets of muddy boots by the door. Word had come from Sacramento that Cobb had sold the mill and left the valley. Some said he had gone to Oregon. Others said he had headed east. Back where he came from, Lucas did not much care where he went, as long as he stayed gone. The new mill owner, a man named Fletcher from Redding, paid 90 cents per board foot and kept his hands off the scale. The saw moved between them without effort now. Lucas pulled, Margaret pulled, the blade bit into Douglas fir, throwing sawdust in a steady stream. The rhythm was second nature, something their bodies knew without their minds telling them. Push, pull, push, pull. The sound of it filled the forest, scattering jays, silencing squirrels. They had been working since dawn. The light was fading now. Sunset, turning the sky to copper and rose above the treetops. Lucas's shoulders ached. His hands were numb inside his gloves, but the pile of cut timber behind them had grown taller than his head, and the satisfaction of it sat warm in his chest. Margaret stopped pulling. Lucas looked up. She was watching him across the length of the saw, her face flushed with effort, strands of dark hair escaping her braid. Sawdust clung to her sleeves. Her collar, the fabric stretched across her shoulders. "What?" he asked. She did not answer, just stood there, breathing hard. Her scarred hands resting on the ash handle, Lucas set down his end of the saw, walked around the half-cut log to where she stood. The sawdust was thick on the ground here, soft under his boots. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Her palm was rough with calluses, thick pads of hardened skin where blisters had formed and healed and formed again. A scar ran across the base of her thumb where the bark had cut her that first week. Her nails were short, practical, nothing like the smooth fingers that had shaken his hand in the lamplight 30 days ago. 30 days. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like no time at all. "I wrote for a plain woman," Lucas said. His voice came out rough, scraped by sawdust and something else. Someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. Someone who wouldn't mind calloused hands and sawdust in the floorboards. Margaret's fingers curled around his. "I got exactly what I asked for." He turned her palm upward, studied the lines and scars, the strength that had not been there when she arrived. "Just took me a while to see past my own foolishness." She looked at their hands, his and hers, rough against rough, work-worn against work-worn. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. "They don't look much like a lady's hands anymore." "No." Lucas lifted his eyes to hers. "They look like a timber woman's hands. That what I am now, a timber woman." He thought about the first day the stagecoach, the dust, the woman who had stepped down with steady eyes and a lifted chin, the way she had walked past him into the cabin without asking permission, the way she had cooked supper from nothing, proposed her 30-day bargain, shaken his hand like a man closing a deal. He thought about the river, the laughter, the tears he had heard through the wall, the numbers she had found in his ledgers, the room full of men who had listened when she spoke. He thought about the portmanteau sitting beside his bed, where it had stayed for a month now, unopened, unneeded. "That's what you've been since day 3, he said. "Just took the rest of us time to catch up." The sunset light caught her face, turned her eyes to honey and shadow. She did not smile. Neither did he. But something passed between them, acknowledgement. Maybe understanding. The quiet recognition of two people who had chosen each other with open eyes. She squeezed his hand once, let go, reached for the saw. "We've got another hour of light," she said. "That timber won't cut itself." Lucas picked up his end of the saw, found his grip on the worn ash handle. The blade bit into wood, sawdust flew, and the rhythm carried them forward, together, into the fading light. There is something quiet that stays with us after a story like this one. Not a lesson, not a message we need to carry away, just a feeling familiar and tender, like the weight of something we have known before, but never quite named. Many of us have stood where Lucas stood, doubting what was right in front of us, letting old wounds speak louder than new truths. Some of us have been Margaret, proving ourselves day after day to someone who could not yet see, carrying on anyway, waiting to be believed. We do not always get the words right. We hesitate when we should speak. We ask the wrong questions at the wrong time, and sometimes, if we are lucky, we find our way back before it is too late. It is all right if this story did not resolve everything inside you. Some things are not meant to be resolved. They are meant to be felt, held for a moment, then gently set down. The cabin in the woods still stands, the saw still sings, and two people who chose each other with open eyes are still there, working side by side. Thank you for staying until the end. It has been good to have you here.